Neil Jameson, a man who has been involved since the inception of KB United, as it was in 1978, in the National Soccer League. He spent what I reckon is basically 40 years of unpaid labour being involved in the game. Is that fair to say, Jammer? What are your memories of those early days?
Geez, well, you certainly date me, Loey. Well, memories of the early days was just to try and get it set up as a fan and then go and sit in the grandstand and sit back for the next 40 odd years and really enjoy it. But as history relates, it had a tendency to trip over itself, and when it did, because I'd been involved with the original formation, I sort of felt duty bound from time to time to jump back into the breach and sort of help pick it up again. But to this day and age, I still relish the prospect of actually sitting back and being a fan and nothing more.
Well, that's interesting. All that effort, basically unpaid. There's a lot of mercenaries in this room that probably wouldn't understand it, the interviewer being one. The 40 years you talk about, can you fondly remember the best moments for us?
Well, getting the club launched was fantastic. Enormous debt of gratitude to Ray Bartz, because when we floated the idea of Newcastle being in the league, you could tell that the governors of the game had a total blind spot to Newcastle's role and history in Australian football, and they had no regard for us whatsoever, even though two of the starting 11 who got us to the 74 World Cup were actually Newcastle boys in a side that didn't have a real lot of Australian produced players. So we had to get their attention. The league was going to kick off in 77. We missed the boat, so we kicked off in 78. When it became reality, when we saw that side come together under the coaching of Alan Vest and play its first game before a packed international sports centre crowd, I guess that was just one of those incredible moments when you thought, yeah, we've done it, we're here, we're back on the map.
Good memory, Jamo. What about, to jump straight from the good to the worst?
The worst memories when, probably partly precipitated by the steel industry crisis of 1981, there wasn't a lot of disposable income left in Newcastle, and for every job lost at BHP, they said that 1.5 jobs went out there in the community. That and some other issues had a massive impact on the viability of the club, and basically they tossed us out of the league in subsequent seasons. The irony of that there was one of the clubs which was one of their favoured pets that had a debt in advance of $600,000 to their bank. I think our debt was in the vicinity of $60,000 to $80,000, but they choose to throw us out of the league. I guess that what we learned at the time was that there was a little bit of resentment towards Newcastle because we're a community-wide club and a lot of the other clubs weren't, and they resented our model. Plus, to all intents and purposes, we were popular. We had community-wide support, and they resented that at the time, I think.
Which brings us neatly to the current day with the Jets, a model based on no ethnicity, if you like, which is, one of the goals of the A-League, has been all along. Where do you think we sit right now in terms of viability, long-term viability? Where does the game sit in comparison to those early days?
Looking at the Jets in isolation, the continuing theme with Newcastle in the National League and then in the A-League was we were always cash short, we were cash poor. To have the club cash rich or supported by a guy who's given the project real cash flow is such a novelty to us, and it's already indicated the amount of confidence that flows through the entire project, not just here in Newcastle, but all in the networking that is football. When the word gets out there that you've actually got cash to afford players to play in the transfer market, everything changes. It changes everything. So first and foremost, that accounts for where we're at the moment and the current confidence around the club. I think the challenge for the current custodians of the Newcastle Jets, while we're sitting in this good position, is to future-proof the club. The history of Newcastle in all things, particularly coal and steel and football, has been boom and bust, bust and boom. We've got to take the hills, the hollows out of that process and work behind the scenes right now to future-proof future-proof the club. Martin Lee's made a tremendous gesture and of generosity towards Newcastle, but there's no guarantees he will stay forever. So, to me, having looked at the history over these 40 years, the challenge right now is to future-proof the club for the day when Martin says, guys, I no longer want it. It's been great, but I no longer want to carry the can. Back to you. Because if we don't do that now, as soon as the current generosity reaches its termination, we're back to where we were.
Well, it's been 40 years, but I can tell that the intensity and certainly the intelligence is still there. Can you tell us how your love affair with the code or the game began? Was it back to the Craig Johnson era? I mean, everybody in the room will know that you wrote Craig's autobiography, and you followed his career and been an advisor and a friend and all those sorts of things. Was that the start of it for you?
No, my dad loved the game. He played at junior representative level until work took him away from the game at the back end of the Depression. He and I used to religiously go and watch the national team play, whoever they were playing, whoever was here. Dad and I would go, and he really inculcated me with that love of the game. It helped that the grandparents' house, the house in which he grew up, was across the road from Adamstown Rosebud's gate, and I'd see those players walk in there, the Johns boys, etc. They're great players of that era, and as a young kid, they were like heroes to me. So I had this love of the game. That intensified with the prospect of Australia making the '74 World Cup finals, and I went to England in that era and watched as much football as I could. And when I came back, the plan always was, off the back of the World Cup euphoria of '74, to launch a national league. Well, the governors of the day, being who they were and not very good at their jobs, they missed they treated Rally Racing very badly after the World Cup. Two, they missed the jump. Instead of cashing in straight away in season 75 and being ready to go, they didn't really get it up and running till season 77. And I was horrified that the oversight that Newcastle was not going to be included. I pulled a little bit of a Swiftie at the time. I was a football writer at the Newcastle Herald, so I sort of did a beat up about this scandal that Newcastle wasn't going to be involved, and I went to the great man Ray Bartz, who had been part of that World Cup qualifying success, and asked Ray a couple of Dorothy Dixes about how terrible this was, and he answered in kind. And the result of that was that we sort of got our heads together, and Ray was very well connected with the better thinkers in football in Newcastle and northern New South Wales, and he pulled those people to the table. We formed a steering committee, and out of the steering committee came the submission to get into the league, and the late Paul Trisley was a fabulous sports administrator, did it all honorary too, by the way, in his spare time. He wrote the bulk of that submission, and it was an absolute winner. It was just, they couldn't refuse us. And we came in '78 and played that first game in March of '78, and it was wonderful. It sort of justified all my thinking at the time, and I didn't have the skill set to do it, but I was lucky enough to get in contact with the people who did have that sort of clout and wisdom to actually get it up and running.
Well, I'm not sure everybody in the room knows that, and we want to know a little bit more about Neil Jameson. Obviously, very talented lead bowler at the Lowlands Bowling Club on very sparse occasions. A loyal member of the unofficial Merriweather Surf Patrol after the bike rides on a Tuesday morning, I believe.
Yeah.
But also a very, very well-respected journalist in his day. Just going back to that, can I just ask you, in your journalistic career, are there any people that you may have interviewed that stand out as somebody that, opened your eyes or gave you some sort of vision that there was a better way, there was a better prospect for you, for the town?
A guy who was, this would probably surprise many, who really opened my eyes to about what constitutes the element of success when you've got a very complex project in front of you, and how to break it down into the elements that actually produce success. And that was John Bertram, the skipper of Australia 2 when they won the America's Cup in 1983. Bertram was a engineer by trade, and he'd gone to MIT in Boston, which is one of the great science and engineering faculties in the world, and that changed his thinking. He saw how America and Americans approached the prospect of success, how they went about it, and he learned much, and he brought that thinking into that project, and he brought sports psychology or professional psychology into the project. He broke complex tasks down into do what's in front of you, play the next thing, and almost that mantra, the next thing. Don't let the complexity of the process blow your mind. Just do the next thing you have to do, because life or any challenge is just broken up into a whole series of next things. And subsequent to interviewing Bertrand, he gave me a copy of his book, and I read that from cover to cover. And it was almost a blueprint for how to do complex tasks like form and structure a football club and run it successfully. And so that was one guy. One of the things you get to do as a working journalist, you get to interview a whole bunch of successful people, and there is various themes that come across, common traits in what made them successful. And you often ask them, you seem to make the right choice, and they'll say, no, I made a choice, and I backed myself 100% with that choice. When I looked at the choices that I'd pushed aside, I never looked back at them again. I pushed them aside, and I backed the one choice that I made. If I backed A over B, I went 100% with A. I never looked at B again. And so that was a very compelling lesson. And when you pooled all the combined knowledge of those people, that was one of the common denominators that came through. But when they made a choice, they went 100% with that choice. They never diverted.
All right, Gemma, we're running out of time. I'm sure the audience is already raucous and had a few drinks. Have you got, and I don't want to sound like, we're about to call the funeral directors or anything, have you got any great ambition left in your life in terms of a sporting escapade or a big project? And maybe you can tie it in with this one. If you had one interview that you could choose from anywhere in the world that you haven't been able to get, but has maybe never been possible, never been on the table, who might that be?
Probably the Dalai Lama. I think. I'm guessing that.
Who does he support?
I think he would have made a good coach. I think if just that innate wisdom that comes to it, because that's one of the great common denominators about sport is the thing about happy dressing rooms, and he seems to be an eternal optimist. So if you had the football acumen of, say, a Jose Mourinho and the lighter side of the Dalai Lama, maybe you got the perfect manager. I don't know. I guess in terms of, I still have this wonderful ambition, or that for Newcastle and this region to be all it can be as a football entity. I don't think it's reached its potential yet. I think in terms of reaching its potential, it's not so much us switching the outside world on to what we've really got going for us here, but for us actually realising it ourselves, that we really do have something special here, and we've just got to maximise it and let it achieve its own potential.
Well, as an ex-footballer and a football fan, I can think of no better ending than a happy ending, really, Gemma. And I'd like to thank you for your insight, for your wisdom, and for your contribution to 40 years of endeavour and football in the Hunter region. We're sorry you couldn't be here today. I sincerely hope that you found a TAB on Lord Howe Island. But again, thanks very much on behalf of everyone in the room.
Cheers, David, and a big shout out to all those people who have made great friends with over those 40 years. It's been a treat.
Thanks, mate.